How many of you have ever been forgotten? You know, maybe somebody was supposed to be in a meeting and, oh, I forgot. It's supposed to meet you for lunch. Oh, I forgot. It's supposed to pick you up. Oh, I forgot. You ever been there? How many of you have forgotten someone? Oh, don't you hate it when that happens and you got to apologize? And, oh, it's an awful feeling. Elizabeth and I lost our Parents of the Year award. I guess, time flies. It's probably been 10 years ago now. And we lost Elizabeth. We never drive the same, never ride to church together. We're one of those folks that has to bring two cars because I come early and she gets there whenever she does. And it's one of those things that's just not worth arguing about. You know what I'm saying? Choose your battles, right? So nevertheless, one Sunday, we drove home, got all the way home, and the phone rang. And my friend Donnie was on the other end of the line. He said, "Did you forget something?" I don't know. Donnie, what are you talking about? He said, "I have Nathan." And I looked at her and I said, "I thought you got him." "No, I thought you got him." Neither one of us had gotten him. We'd both forgotten him. And he's still at church and we're at home. But I'm thinking, there's another guy I know that got left at church. Didn't Jesus get left at So if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for Nathan. Okay, so no problem. But I hate it when that happens. So last week, we left Joseph in prison, right? After he had been forgotten by Pharaoh's cupbearer, after Joe had given him a favorable interpretation to his dream, and everything had turned out exactly the way Joseph said it would. The guy just forgets him. It's awful, but we pick up the story in Genesis chapter 41. So he's forgotten him, and he's sitting there, Genesis 41, verse 1, when 2 full years had passed. I want to stop there. When 2 full years had passed, for 2 years, Joseph is sitting and rotting in that prison. Now, a lot of things. Think about your life over the last 2 years and all the stuff that's happened. A lot can happen in 2 years, right? Time flies when you're having fun. At my stage in life, at the ripe old age of 40-something, it seems like Christmas comes around every 3 months, But my kids, it seems like it's every 3 years. The perspective has changed, but time just flies. There's so much going on. But imagine Joseph. He's a young man. And he's sitting there in the darkness of that dungeon. How long did those 2 years feel like to him? It had to feel like a decade to him. 2 years, 2 more years to just sit. 2 more years to think about how he wound up there. 2 more years to think about how this guy had forgotten him. 2 full years to sit there. And I think, that could have done a number on his mind and his heart and his soul. But never does the writer of Genesis describe Joseph as despairing or complaining or doubting. That may have happened, but his interactions with other people as they're recorded in the Bible just don't seem to bear that out. 2 long, lonely, agonizing years must have felt like a lifetime. And I wonder, did he, in those darkest moments, did he think that he would spend the rest of his life there? Did he dare dream about the day that he would be released, or was that dream something he just really couldn't allow himself to think about? Some of you may be there. You've been there. We're going to be there, right? But in those moments where you think, oh my goodness, is it going to be like this forever? Is it going to be this hard forever? Am I going to hurt like this? Is this going to be like this for the rest of my life? And I think about that, and I think, what was Joseph learning during this time? It seems like the lessons were many as we continue the story. Lessons like faith and humility and patience and management as he handled the responsibilities that were given him by the warden. Lessons that, unbeknownst to him, would come handy in the days to come. Again, we pick up the story in verse 1. So, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. Then the thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. And Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning, his mind was troubled. So he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Now these wise men and magicians were the most learned, most highly educated men in all of Egypt. I mean, they were familiar with all of the ancient literature. They were close confidants to Pharaoh. To their credit, I mean, if you're in their shoes and you're wanting to please Pharaoh, or you're wanting to impress Pharaoh, or you're scared of Pharaoh, what are you going to do? Make something up, right? You can make up a good story. Well, here's what I think it means, And these guys didn't do that. To their credit, I mean, they wanted to please him. They wanted to show him how smart they were, but basically they looked at him and said, I got nothing. I got nothing. Search me. I don't have any idea what any of this means, They were honest. And so we pick up the story in verse 9. This is awesome. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I love this. Today, I'm reminded of my shortcomings. That's Bible for, I forgot. Oh, that hurt. Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night. Each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. And when he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. So the chief cupbearer was like, wait a minute. I used to know this guy. I had forgotten all about him. Oops. Darn. But you know what? Maybe he can help. And I'm reading that, I'm thinking, well, I guess better late than never, right? So Pharaoh sends for young Joseph. Now I'm reading that story and I'm thinking, okay, if the king's wise men and confidants couldn't help him, then why is he putting his trust and confidence in this young Jewish boy? But it sounds like these dreams were really bothering Pharaoh, and his interpretation was right on before, so he figures, well, why not give it a shot? I mean, what do I have to lose? If the guy didn't give me a message, I want off with his head, so why not try and give it a shot? So they go and get Joseph, and now listen, I love this. So they go drag him out of the dungeon, right? Now he's been in the dungeon, been in jail, been in prison. So what do they got to do? They got to go clean him up, shave him, put some clothes on him, and then they take him to Pharaoh. Pick up in verse 15. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I've heard said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I can't do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Talk about humility and integrity. I mean, this was Joseph's moment to shine, to show Pharaoh how intelligent and how discerning he is. And it would be a great opportunity to get back at the cupbearer. I mean, think about it, How many of us would want to look at him and go, hey, listen, Pharaoh, do you realize that I could have been out of that hole 2 years ago if that knothead standing over there had just remembered me? I could have been helping you out. I could have been interpreting these dreams for 2 years. I could have saved you all kinds of lost sleep if that moron had just remembered me. So I'll tell you what, here's what we're going to do, Pharaoh. You want me to help you out? You help me out. You throw him back in jail, and I'll interpret your dream. Is that what he said? No, he didn't go there. I almost kind of wish he would have. Then I wouldn't feel so guilty about how I think. But But that's not what he said. In humility, Joseph says, hey, listen, I'm not the one with the answers, but I serve a God who is. So let's both listen to him, and he'll tell us what he wants us to know. And in fact, he's saying, Pharaoh, you've got all of these gods, but there is a God. There is a God beyond the stars that he created. And your guys, your wise guys, your magicians, all those, they're soothsayers. They're looking up at those stars, but they don't know the God beyond those stars, but I do. And he will interpret these dreams because God is in the dream business. And when this is all interpreted and when this is all worked out, literally what this says is God will give you peace of mind. God will give you shalom. So Joseph shows this incredible humility, incredible courage, talking with Pharaoh. Story again, verse 17. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed along the reeds. E-I-E-I-O. No, I added that, sorry. Just thought it was, never mind. And after them, 7 other cows came up, scrawny and ugly and lean, and I love this. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. It reminds me of some of the farmers and ranchers I know. That's an ugly cow, Ugly cow. And these lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first, but even after they ate them, no one could tell that they'd done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dream, I saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. The 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It's one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterwards are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It's just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So, Pharaoh, I got good news, and I got bad news. Things are going to be good for a while. In fact, for 7 years, things are going to be very, very good, and there's going to be an abundance of grain, and money is going to be flowing, and things are going to be great. Now, what do most people do when they have an abundance? When times are good, and everything's rolling in, and everything's going well, what's our tendency? Spend it all, Spend it all, assuming that times are always going to be good. Nations do it. Families do it. Businesses do it. Churches do it. And here's the important lesson here. Good times, as great as they are, don't last forever. So we need to be wise and build up a war chest, a savings account, to be prepared for those tough times. That's what the prudent business owner, the prudent family member, the prudent pastor does. We build up that war chest. We make sure that we're ready when the tough time comes, because it's coming. And that's the other half of the story. After 7 years of abundance, there will be a severe famine that's going to ravage the entire region. Now here's the really cool thing. Joseph doesn't just give Pharaoh the news. He also suggests a course of action. Now, some people have suggested that Joseph took a real risk here. I mean, who is he to make a suggestion to Pharaoh? But I can tell you, as a leader, I bet you Pharaoh loved this. Because every leader knows what it's like to have people bring them problems, but offer no solutions, I deal with that all the time as a pastor. Folks come and they say, hey, pastor, hey, Jim, here's a problem. Here's an issue. And somebody should do something. Somebody meaning you, or you and the staff. Somebody ought to fix this. That's not what Joseph does. Instead, he steps out and he offers wise advice, beginning at verse 33. And now, let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Since we know hard times are coming, let's prepare for it. Let's save up for it. During this 7 years of abundance, let's put some grain back every year for 7 years, and then we'll be ready to weather the storm. But here's the coolest line here. Can we find anybody? Is there anyone available like this guy? One in whom is the Spirit of God. Oh, man, I love that. I love that question, because here's what's going on. Egypt at this time was a polytheistic culture. They had many gods, the small g, but there was something. There was something about Joseph and something about his God that set him apart from all of the rest. And here's the takeaway for us. We live in a pluralistic culture. And I've taught all kinds of ways to go out and share our faith and all that sort of thing. But bottom line, folks, being a representative for God doesn't mean that we have to go out and preach at people. Now, I do that on occasion, weekly, that's my job. But as we're interacting with our culture, what's going to set us apart? What's going to make people see God in us? Is it going to be preaching at them? And here's my question. Am I? And I wrestle with this. Am I? Are you? Are we living our lives in such a way that the people around us can look at us and see something different about us and see that we know God and that we know the God, and that we're so connected with Him that it's obvious that God is real in our lives? Are we living our lives that way? Are we able to share the stories of what God has done with us in a way that people say, wow, there's something different about this guy. There's something different about this lady. There's something different here. I wonder about that. I mean, in spite of everything that Joseph has been through, the betrayal of his family, wrongly accused of wrongdoing, thrown in prison unjustly, and then forgotten and left there to rot, Joseph still has faith and integrity and humility and honesty and a trust of God that is absolutely unwavering. And all of that doesn't go unnoticed by Pharaoh, who doesn't even believe in his God. Amazing. We pick up the story in verse 39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there's no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Now, note here, when they asked the question, is there anybody like that? You didn't see Joseph going, me, hey, me, yeah, I'll take the job, I'll apply, I'll volunteer, where's my application? I can do this. He didn't even try to sell himself to Pharaoh as the man for the job, even though it has seemed appropriate for Joseph to volunteer. he restrained himself. And I look at that and I think, man, how many of us have maneuvered or plotted, to get something that we want, only to live to regret it? One of the most embarrassing moments many people have is the day they get their wish. They get what they've schemed and manipulated to acquire, only to have it dissolve right in their hands. That's not the kind of promotion that Joseph was after. Nor was he going to go there and do his self-promotion. He just wasn't going to do that. Joseph knew that if this was something God wanted him to do, then God would make it happen. And precisely that is what happened. So Joseph was put in charge of all of the commerce of Egypt, second in command only to Pharaoh. He was given the signet ring of Pharaoh. Now that word signet means literally to sink. And so it's the idea of that ring sinking down into the clay that sealed a contract or sealed a treaty. I mean, this is amazing. This young man had all of the responsibility for the management of the entire nation. Wow. Now, think about this. Joseph was 17 years old. Okay, he's a teenager. The age of a high school junior or senior when he was sold into slavery by his brothers. He's been in Egypt now for 13 years. Much of that spent in prison because he did the right thing. And now he's 30 years old and in charge of the entire nation. And I'm thinking, my goodness, what a meteoric rise. To go from the countryside, the Judean countryside, to slavery, to being in Potiphar's house, to prison, and now in charge of an entire country. How many 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds or 60-year-olds could handle that kind of promotion, could handle that kind of power and prestige? I mean, with a lot of folks, it would go straight to their head. We see that in the headlines all the time. People that just can't handle the blessings that have come to them. But I believe it was the experiences of his life up to this point, all of those difficulties, all of those betrayals, all of that unjust treatment that taught that arrogant, favored child of Jacob some hard lessons. While in slavery and then in prison, he learned something that's difficult to learn when everything's going well. It's through these tough times that we learn to trust. That we learn to trust God. That we learn humility because we understand that life is out of our control. We learn faith because that may be all that we have to hold on to. We learn integrity. We learn honesty. We learn to fear God because He alone can deliver us and restore us. These were the lessons that God knew Joseph needed to learn before He could put him in the position that ultimately He wanted him to be in, a position that would give him the power to save lives, millions of lives, even the lives of his own family who betrayed him. We'll see that next week. But for this week, I want us to see how God used those tough seasons to bless Joseph and make him a blessing. We pick up the story in verse 44. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I'm Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zephanath-Paneah, and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Say that 10 times real fast. Yes, I practiced those names so I could get those right. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, not Manasses, Manasseh. and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble in my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim, and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph, and do what he tells you to do." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. Don't you just love it when a plan comes together? But I'll tell you what, can you imagine? Think about this. How tough would things have gotten? I mean, Joseph and his employees were going around and taking 20% of the grain that everyone raised. They're commandeering it more or less. Okay, we want a fifth of everything that you produce, and we're going to store it up. And can you imagine how tough it would have been if things hadn't worked out like he said they were going to? I mean, how many times during that 7 years did people second guess him and question his motives? And who is this guy to tell us what to do? And why do we have to give him our grain? But dealing with his brothers and managing Potiphar's house and his servants and his experiences with fellow inmates over whom he had responsibility while he was in prison had prepared him to deal with this kind of pressure, this level of leadership. And I'm thinking, man, how cool is that? God knew what he wanted to do with Joseph all along, and it took a long time, but he was preparing him every step of the way for what he needed Joseph to be. And that brings me to 3 applications that we're going to go through real quick today. 3 applications. This is where you may want to jot some notes. First thing, lengthy difficulties and delays need not discourage us. Lengthy difficulties and delays need not discourage us. Remember, Joseph was 17 when he was sold to his brothers. Not until he was 30 was he discovered and rescued by Pharaoh. So from 17 to 30, 13 long years since the bottom had dropped out of his life. 13 years of ups and downs, and mostly downs as things went from bad to worse. 13 years of one setback after another. 13 years. And yet Joseph remained faithful. He did not allow himself to be dragged into the pit of despair. Through it all, he learned to trust God, God's timing, God's plan, and more than anything, to trust God's presence in his life. It's like we said last week. Life will happen to us. We live in a fallen creation where bad things happen, but whether we believe it or not, we do have a choice as to how we will respond. Things are going to happen, but we can choose how we will respond. Are we going to get bitter or better? Will we trust God or will we give up on him? Will we learn to depend on God or just get depressed? We have a choice. We may not have a choice about what happens, but we have a choice about how we'll respond. Secondly, bad memories need not define or defeat us. Bad memories need not define or defeat us. And believe me, I know how easy that is to say and how hard that is to do. I have bad memories. Anyone who knows my story knows that those memories are there. I mean, it's almost some days like a PTSD type deal. So I know what bad memories are like, and so do you. And we can allow them to define us and to defeat us. We can, and a lot of people do. But Joseph's story tells us that we don't have to go there. We don't have to allow our bad memories to define us and defeat us. The names of both of Joseph's sons are a play on words. Manasseh comes from the Hebrew verb nasha, which means to forget. So when you forget something, you just say, I live in Manassas, I forget. It's all right. It means literally to forget. So Joseph, in giving his son this name, is saying, God has helped me to forget. Now, does that mean that he no longer has those memories of those betrayals and that pain and that difficulty? No. They're still there. They're still etched into his brain. But God had enabled him to forget the sting of those memories. The memories are there, but they don't cause pain. They don't sting anymore. Though they're a part of his past, they don't define his present, and they don't defeat him as he moves into the future. The second son, Joseph named Ephraim, which means twice fruitful. So what he's saying is, though this life has been hard, God has blessed me beyond measure in a place that once just seemed to only bring suffering. So even though, or maybe because of his difficulties, Joseph in humility acknowledges God's goodness. In naming both of his sons, he says, God made me. God has made me. God has made me forget. God has made me fruitful. It's all about God. Some of us need that reminder. Because I know that many of us have painful memories. Things from the past that we wish we could forget. Memories that we could allow to defeat us and define us. But folks, we need to remember that we've been Manasseh and we've been Ephraim'd. We've been given that gift. God can make us forget the sting of our memories and be fruitful in this life if we let him, if we'll trust him. I mean, that's what the cross is about. It's God saying, I forgive you. I'm giving you a new life, an eternal life. Sure, those memories are going to be there. Yes, you've made mistakes, but they don't have to define you or defeat you. I forgive you. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it to the fullest. You don't have to be defined by your past failures and the memories that you replay over and over and over in your mind. Jesus says, listen, I came to put all of that aside. You can have a new life. Now, if that's not something that you've been able to do yet, I'd love to talk with you about that. I'd love to. But there's a third application. And bear with me on this. It'll make sense. Great blessings need not disqualify us from service. Great blessings need not disqualify us from service. And here's what I mean by that. Churches, every church I've been a part of, including this one, we're really good about helping the down and out, and we should be. But I've also noticed that a lot of church folks are suspicious about, or maybe even intimidated by people who are successful. I mean, I think about many of the sermons that I've heard or I've delivered, and they're slanted toward helping folks whose lives are a train wreck. And as much as that may be necessary, the unwritten message is that the good news is only for people who are screwed up, for people whose lives are a mess. And we need to remember that the message of Jesus is for everyone. It cuts across all demographic lines. It's as much for the CEO as it is for the homeless guy. The love of Jesus crosses all of those lines. And here's why I'm going into this. Some of us have been blessed. We've come from intact families who aimed us in a good direction, and for whatever reason, we've been blessed. Others of us are like Joseph. We've come out of some miserable, difficult, horrible circumstances, but we've worked hard, and we've lived with integrity, and we have found ourselves in a good place. And that's not something that we should be embarrassed about or apologize for. It's something to give thanks to God for, and it's something God expects us to use to bless other people. Joseph used God's blessing in his life to keep millions of people from starving to death. And if you've been blessed, then you're in a position to be a blessing. I mean, I think about this church and so many churches that are able to do what we do because people who have been blessed and successful have been generous and supportive. So my question is, if you've been blessed, what are you doing with those blessings? Don't disqualify yourself because you're in a good place. Use that place to make a difference in other people's lives with integrity and humility. A survey was taken several years ago. They found a group of people over 95 years old. It was a small survey sample, but surveyed people over 95 years old. They were asked one open-ended question that they could answer any way they wished. Here's the question. If you could live your life over again, if you could dial back the clock and do it all over again, what would you do differently? Numerous responses were given. Among all the answers, 3 were most prominent. I would take more time to reflect. Take more time to reflect. I would take more risks. And I would do more things that would live on after I'm gone. Now, in my mind, those second 2, I would take more risks and I would do more things that would live on after I'm gone. It seems like they're related. And I wonder how many of us haven't taken risks, haven't risked investing ourselves in things that would live on after we're gone, because of the messages in our mind that tell us we're disqualified, because of the memories that plague us and say, you can't do that. I wonder. Would you bow your heads, close your eyes? I want you to think about a question. In your life, what risks are you taking for God? What are you investing in? What are you doing? What are you putting your time and effort in that's going to live beyond you, outlive you? And if you haven't done that, is it because those past memories remind you of that failure that is so painful and you don't dare go there again? Because your past tells you that somehow you've been disqualified? Maybe it's time to replace some messages in your mind. And replace those messages of you can't with the message of God's grace that tells us that we are more than our past. And it's time to move on. To hear the words of Jesus, I've come so that you might have life and have it to the fullest. You can take risks. You can invest yourself in things that are going to outlive you. I'm going to be there with you. Trust me. God, thank you for the